Welcome to Rite Gud, the only podcast that helps you write good. I'm Aris Benedict, and this is my very whiny cat, Harley. In this episode, we're talking to Matt Wolfbridge about his new online magazine, Typebar, which just launched very recently. Thank you for coming on the show, Matt.
Oh, thank you for having me, Raquel. It's a pleasure to be here.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with your publication, how would you describe Typebar?
Sure. So we're officially described as an irreverent online magazine publishing literary analysis, cultural criticism, and stories about typewriters in less kind of serious terms. You know, I like to describe us jokingly as an interesting thing to read on the internet. And it's kind of like our tagline. You know, we're kind of a literary journal that publishes interesting essays, right? So like we're something between like London Review of Books and like Tor, right? So we don't just do like the highbrow literary stuff, but at the same token, we don't just do kind of like super recent science fiction listicles or whatever, right?
Yeah, that 2014 BuzzFeed type.
Yes, right. So we analyze it all, and tonally we're in between those two publications as well. So we're not like super stuffy and formal, but we're not engaged in that kind of like ubiquitous internet writer voice that became popularized in the early 2010s.
Yeah. Now, why is it called Typebar?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people have this question. So last spring, about a year ago, I got really into typewriters. I wanted to find a way to write while being totally unplugged from anything digital. And some people would just say, well, why not just use your handwriting? But I have like chicken scratch, like first grader handwriting. Like my handwriting has never gotten better since I was like 8 years old. So it's hard to decipher even my own handwriting, and I'm a pretty fast typist. So I was thinking about something called a free write, and those are way too much money. And so I just decided to get into typewriters. And so when I was coming up with a name, I was like, okay, well, let's try to think about something typewriter related. And so I was thinking of actually calling the magazine Type Slug because it would make the most sense thematically, right? So a type slug on a typewriter is the little metal square that has the letter embossed onto it. That is the part of the typewriter that makes contact with the ink ribbon that leaves the impression of the letter. So it would make the most sense thematically to have that because that's like the part that's actually leaving an impact, right? And I want Typebar to leave an impact. But I didn't like that the name Slug had the name Slug in it, had the word slug in it, right?
Yeah,
and
slug
so,
is just...
Yeah, and so I was like, ooh, Type Slug, I don't like that. But the type slug is connected to the type bar. So when you hit a key on a keyboard, it raises the type bar, and then the type slug hits the ribbon and leaves the impression, right? So it's like, okay, well, type bar is literally the next best thing. So that's why I called it Typebar Magazine.
All right. Because you love typewriters and being unplugged. So why not start an internet magazine?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, right? That's a good point. You know, being online, I suppose, is my vice.
Yeah, no kidding. So, given your love of being unplugged and offline and old school typewriters and all that stuff, why did you start Typebar?
Sure. You know, I hope that I started it because I wanted to read it is not a cop-out answer. And if it is, I'll give you kind of a bit of backstory into how I got to this point. So I think a lot of people who listen to this show can probably relate with being internet obsessed. You know,
no, what?
Yeah, right? Imagine
no.
that. I was online basically all day, every day from like 8th grade onward, right? So in the earlier days, it was like wasting time on forums.
Yep.
I think it's really funny that they call Blue Sky a retirement home for millennial forum posters. Because that's kind of what it feels like sometimes.
Oh, no.
I felt very personally attacked by that. Because like I can still remember a bunch of moderators from forums I was on when I was like in middle school and high school.
That's so hurtful for being as accurate as it is.
But as I got towards the end of college, I started spending that time in like other places, like reading articles on places like Slate, Salon, The Atlantic, whatever, and then posting on Twitter. In 2011, I got kind of obsessed with like media Twitter because I was a media industry aspirant, right? I wanted to be a capital W writer. And what's funny is I remember people in the early 2010s when I broke into media kind of bemoaning the state of the industry. But like the 2011 media was practically like virile and full of vitality compared to today.
Yeah, it had a lot of venture capital money just sort of getting poured onto it.
Yeah, where like today it's the New York Times and then like 20,000 shitty contrarian Substack newsletters. But when I started, the internet was this interesting place, right? And there were interesting essays abound. I remember there was this great essay on the All, one of my favorite personal essays, where this woman had a door-to-door vacuum salesman having an existential breakdown about adulthood in her living room. And, you know, there are all these kind of new and interesting things to read every day. And now it's just like sludge. It's just sludge everywhere. And basically online publishing has taken the human spirit and kind of condensed it into this like algorithmic gray goo. And there's nowhere to go and nothing interesting to read anymore. And so I started Typebar because I wanted there to be somewhere else to go online, somewhere that was like exciting, had interesting things to read, somewhere that reminded me of older websites like the All or the Outline or the Toast. They say be the change you want to see in the world, so here we are.
Why do you think so much of online writing has turned into just goo? Is it just the money's not in there anymore? Or?
Yeah, I could talk for hours and hours about the media industry. I've been working in the online, I hate to call it the online content industry, but I've been working online.
But I mean, that is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. I've been working in the online content industry for a very long time, since 2011. So I could talk for a very long time about it. I'll try to keep it relatively condensed. The oversimplified version is all of the people in charge got in their heads that scale was the only thing that mattered. When anyone who was actually like hitting the publish button on their articles could tell you that wasn't true. But it was a thing all the C-suite jerk-offs were obsessed with, even when it became harder and harder to deny that scale was essentially worthless. You still had guys like Jonah Peretti putting forth these insane fantasies of like BuzzFeed binding together with Vox to somehow strong-arm Facebook and Google into paying publishers more money. And I do think it's interesting that Jonah Peretti likes collective bargaining for massive corporations, but not for his employees. But the ownership class kind of became obsessed with scale at all cost. Scale as in getting immense amounts of traffic. They became kind of obsessed with scale at all costs, even though it's essentially worthless, right? And the only things that you can scale to that degree are these like fast, quick things that are easy to do or easier to do. And you have every 22-year-old writer pump out like 50 of them a day. And now you have AI, generative AI do it. So you have a lot of SEO, spam, for people who don't know, that's search engine optimization. You have listicles, you have quizzes, you have trending gossip, whatever. And I don't want to get over idealistic here because most people say, oh, the audience wants good stories, but it's the junk that gets kind of all of the clicks and people kind of click on the most. So like there's always going to be an audience for junk on some level, right?
And I'm sure that social media, the way it works, it kind of incentivizes junkiness. Yeah. I know because I worked for a content mill too, and I know like quizzes get a ton of engagement. They spread fast. And they're silly, they're fluff. Nothing wrong with them. I do them too. They're fun, but it's not like hard-hitting journalism.
Yeah. And so there's always going to be an audience for junk on some level, just not an invested audience, right? So you can't get somebody to pay you $10 a month or $10 a month for a Patreon for a viral tweet roundup about the solar eclipse or the Panera lemonade that kills people. You know what I mean? So you had all these big media sites thinking, because this goes all the way back to like 2014. And even earlier with like Facebook turning on a traffic fire hose, as people call it, right? Where they were sending immense amounts of traffic to all these publishers like BuzzFeed, right? And then they get everybody hooked and then they turn off the fire hose, right? And then all these publishers are fucked. You had all these big media sites essentially committing harakiri to appease these algorithm gods.
And pivoting to video when it turned out, because Facebook falsely claimed that like their videos got more traffic than they really did.
View counts by like 900%. They were essentially alleged to have been doing, right? And so they learned the hard way, all these publishers, that the Facebook audience was not their audience. They were basically renting one, right? And so once Facebook gets out of the news business, we're seeing the results of all these places kind of building the foundations of their business on a house of cards, where you have Vice getting bought out and shutting down the website completely. You have BuzzFeed getting rid of all the whole news division and saying we're going to do pivot to AI generated quizzes. You have all that
bummer.
Stuff. Yeah.
Like I know BuzzFeed did a lot of trash, but they did sometimes have some really solid investigative pieces or kind of in-depth pieces, and it was like, well, the silly listicles get the traffic so you can fund that stuff, just like in old Playboy, like the titty pictures paid for circulations and you managed to get incredible articles and like legitimately brilliant stories and interviews in there, and now it's just like, no, because like the smart stuff's gone.
I used to work in like I said, I've worked in the online content industry for a while. A large chunk of that was spent in digital news, and I used to work for what I jokingly call like a BuzzFeed Light, like a Diet Coke version of BuzzFeed. One of several, and I'm not going to say which one, obviously, and my assigning editor was basically CrowdTangle. Do you know what that is?
CrowdTangle.
So CrowdTangle was this program that would kind of crawl Facebook and see what the most trending links were. And so that was basically my assigning editor, where the editor would be like, okay, go into CrowdTangle and write up whatever is most trending right now.
Oh, yeah. I worked for a content mill that had very similar thing. We found people are searching for such and such search terms, write, however many words that includes these tags. And it's like, boy, I feel creative.
And so I believe it was John Herman who did this when he was running the All, where he would write up John Oliver algorithm lottery sweepstakes. I forget what he used to call it, but basically after every episode, what's John Oliver's show called on HBO? I don't even remember now. Last Week Tonight. When that show was big, this was like 10 years ago, every single publisher would write up like the top sketch that would be on YouTube, and they'd aggregate it, repackage it, and one of them would win the algorithm lottery and get tons and tons of traffic. I used to have to write this kind of shit. SNL recaps, you name it. And every place was basically chasing the same story and not even trying to package it differently, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the water we've been swimming in for at least 10 years. And so you have writers who got out of that by pivoting to newsletters, and that worked very well for some people, but the problem is we live in an attention economy, and that incentivizes a lot of like contrarianism or otherwise over-the-top takes that you have to keep like...
Right.
I always liken everything back to professional wrestling because I grew up watching professional wrestling, and so it's like, okay, if you've got a weekly wrestling show and this week you put a guy through a table, well, what are you going to do next week to keep people watching? Well, I'm going to have to put him through 2 tables. Okay, what are you going to do after that? You know what I mean? And so you wind up with this problem where you have to kind of keep your subscribers happy, and how do you do that? That's kind of how we get there, and kind of the water we've been swimming in, and that's kind of what Typebar, I don't want to say is born out of, but born in contrast to. Because I was so sick of reading this shit. I just want a website that's fucking normal, okay? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I get it. There's, and it's frustrating because even kind of mainstream publications that I feel like once had a better reputation are kind of pivoting to, they're doing a lot of the clickbait outrage shit, or here's an insanely stupid hot take. Although I feel like with the death of advertising money, that's not even working anymore either. So I don't know what
you can just say the New York Times. It's fine. It won't be
New York
bad.
Times, or like fucking all of them do that. Like Slate does it. The Atlantic does it. Holy shit, does the Atlantic ever do it? All of them fucking do it, and it's embarrassing. Granted, the Atlantic has been like that for a long time.
Yeah.
I was doing some research for a piece I'm working on. I was just looking up some stuff that stupid influencers have done, and I remember an incident a few years ago when a bunch of influencers got criticized for taking a bunch of like sexy, scantily clad selfies in the Chernobyl exclusion zone.
Yes.
Because of the show, like people were just taken, semi-nude with their hazmat suits hanging off of them to show their asses, doing sexy firemen photo shoots in like the horrific, radioactive hell zone.
Right.
I looked it up, and one of the first things that came up on the first page of Google results was a defense of them published in The Atlantic by Taylor Lorenz.
Yeah, cool. Of course.
It's incredible.
Yeah, that's not a surprise.
From 2019.
Oh, boy.
It's like, look, it's fine to do this. Like, no, it isn't. It's not okay to do this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I draw the line at taking sexy selfies in Chernobyl, where a bunch of dudes melted. I'm not cool with this.
Yeah, I
I'm
got
not okay.
radiation poisoning, but I got a lot of likes, so who's to say if it's bad?
Yeah, it was pretty good. Just incredible. Anyway, sorry, I just completely...
No, because I go off on tangents as well, so...
Yeah, it just blew my mind seeing that. I'm like, oh my god, who wrote that? Who published this? Oh my god, The Atlantic. Oh my god, it's fucking her! God damn it!
Yes.
It was just this trifecta of incredible
media history and media strategy of the last 10 to 15 years. That's something I could talk about forever. Or I'll be talking to my fiance about it and other things too. And she'll be like, we have to go to bed.
Sweetheart, stop it.
Yeah.
I need you to be normal and stop yelling about this. No. Just handing you a typewriter to calm you down.
But yeah, I just wanted a website that was fucking normal, that was that existed independent of all this shit. It's what if there was a website that just published good essays and there was no kind of weird appeal to outrage bait or social media or search engines, right? It's just okay, is this a good and interesting pitch that deserves to exist and that is good on its merits? If yes, we'll publish it. If no, try again next time and pitch us again. And that's it. You know what I mean? There's no other kind of broader considerations. That's why I was so shocked when people were saying, oh, Simon McNeil's article was just, to get people pissed off. And it's what?
A very thoughtful writer, and you might not agree with him, but everything that I've read is very carefully reasoned and well considered, and he put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
It's incredible. He will put weeks and weeks of thought into a post about some obscure drama between two sci-fi bloggers, and I'm like, God damn, why are you citing Kierkegaard in this bit about a Twitter fight? What the fuck is going on, Simon? It's incredible. He's a very smart man. But
yeah, he's a brilliant writer. I've read his stuff before, and and I read his Blue Sky posts, obviously, because I follow him on Blue Sky, and said to accuse him of committing outrage bait is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I'd like to get to Simon's article in a little bit. Before we get into that, let's talk about how you started Typebar, because I think it's cool. You're not the first person in the Rite Gud orbit to start your own magazine, which I think is really cool. I think it's really cool that so many of the people I've met doing this thing that I do have looked at the publications around and not just complained, but said, fuck it, I'll start my own magazine with blackjack and hookers. And then went on to do it. So how did you do that? How did you start Typebar? How did you get funding? How did you assemble writers, take care of web hosting, design, editing, beta testing, promotion, all that stuff? How did you do it?
Well, I did it with great difficulty. I kid, I assure you. So it's funny you mention that other people in the orbit of the show have done that, because I listened to the Blood Knife and Seize the Press episodes of the show probably a dozen times each, no joke. Just to reinforce in my brain that this was possible. I'd like to give a shout out to Kurt Schiller of Blood Knife for answering some questions that I had. If you haven't listened to his episode of the show where he talks about starting Blood Knife, you should listen to it, because he has
rules.
Yeah, he has more insightful things to say about it than I do. But to answer the question, I had been running the operations for my MFA program's literary magazine for almost the entire 2-year duration of my degree. I do have an MFA. Don't hold that against me, please. So I knew I could handle kind of the logistics, doing the WordPress stuff, running the social media, and I had kind of done that stuff in the quote unquote big leagues. I'm not trying to do that to people in big league them, but I had run the social media and done some WordPress stuff for websites that were getting 20 million uniques a month, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I knew I could do that stuff. It was the editorial stuff I was a bit intimidated by. I had initially wanted Typebar to be a fiction magazine, kind of Seize the Press, but with a more kind of like less genre stuff and more focus on like weird literary fiction. But even after an MFA, I felt I was not qualified to run a fiction magazine. Like I didn't have the experience, but I'd worked in nonfiction in the media industry in one capacity or another for a very long time. You know, I'd worked for major websites, either as a writer, editor, or doing like insights analysis. So I felt much more confident because I had over a decade of experience dealing with all that stuff. So the first thing I had to do was come up with a name, which we already talked about. Then I had to come up with a logo. I hired an artist on Blue Sky named Mox. They're at moxiest.art on Blue Sky. So that's @MOXIEST.art on Blue Sky. They did an amazing job on the logo. Then I had to find a WordPress theme, which was actually a nightmare because the theme I chose and fell in love with had all of these like optimization issues. And I had to get an image optimizer to help with the load times. And what's so funny is the images on the site don't load for me, but they load for everybody else. Because like, I keep asking people like, "Can you all see the images?" And they're like, "Yeah."
You're like, "Yeah, it's fine, dude."
Yeah. And so at some point, I have to consult like a professional WordPress guy because like I've run up against my own knowledge barrier of WordPress, and like I was able to teach myself some things, but there's just a lot to know about like WordPress. Like I'm not a professional web designer or anything. I just like kind of know, I can like feel my way around WordPress and kind of Google things that I don't know. Like I know enough to be able to Google my way through most problems, but then there's other stuff that's like more advanced that I'm not an expert in. But then of course I needed articles, right? And that had me the most nervous. I was afraid we would get 0 pitches since we were brand new. I solicited some writers that I knew I wanted, and thankfully most of them said yes. So issue 1 was 9 articles, and 4 out of those 9 were ones that I had solicited. The rest were pitched to me. I think what helped most was being part of the Rite Gud Discord, which is a strong writing community filled with good writers.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I also have a great writing community from my MFA program, and so all of these people would be able to trust me since they'd known me. They would know that they could pitch me and that I would actually pay them if I said I was going to pay them, and I wouldn't try to like screw them or anything. And they would share calls for pitches out to other good writers. And so if I'd done that as just some guy on the internet who had no writing community at all, it would have been a lot harder.
Yeah, just trying to field random pitches from random people and not knowing what the fuck it is. Yeah. All right. Well, how about like getting funding? How do you?
Oh, right. Well, we basically don't have. We have a Patreon. I basically kind of eat shit financially on every issue, and so it was something where I had some money saved up, and I was like, okay, I can spend this amount of money in totality on Typebar before we start like. Because we're already losing money, but like before I would have to like shut it down, basically, right? But it's something that I really wanted to do because it's like, okay, like money isn't real, nothing is real. I'm gonna die one day. Like, what does it matter if I lose the money on this? You know, and so it's just like to be able. It's ominous to quote the Fire Festival guys when they say like, oh, let's just do it and be legends. You know, but it's just like, listen, I had the idea to do this since I listened to the episodes of the Blood Knife episode and the Seize the Press episode, because I was like, okay, I'm in this MFA program and I'm basically running everything but editorial for this literary magazine. All I would need to do is the editorial stuff, and I already felt confident with the nonfiction. And so
that's cool.
And I was talking to professors about it, and they were like, oh, I think you'd actually do a really good job of this. And I'm like, okay, let me think about it. And then eventually I was like, let's just go for it. Like, this is the only thing that's kind of getting me out of bed as far as like writing is concerned. Aww. And like once I edited the first essay, I was like, perfect. This is what I was meant to be doing. It just felt really, really good. And then we had some essays that, like, I'm so glad got a chance to exist in the world. We have J.R. Bolt's essay about the Etched City. I remember when he told me about that book like a year and a half, 2 years ago. and I read it and it blew my mind. We have Christopher Sloche's essay on the Channel Awesome trilogy, right? That's another great one that I'm so glad gets a chance to exist. So this was like a great thing. It is currently self-funded. We do have a Patreon that I'm hoping we can eventually get to cover the costs of running the magazine and then some, because my ultimate dream is to have hire an artist for each issue. And have them do the like featured image for every article.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, to give each issue kind of its own visual theme as well. But like hiring good artists is expensive, right?
Yeah. So, if you're gonna pay them what they're worth, they cost a lot of money.
And so that's like kind of my ultimate dream. And then also to have like a PDF and ebook version, like Rite Gud has that, and I think Clark's World has it. Like a bunch of magazines have that. But that's another thing where like I would have to hire somebody because I don't really know that much about doing layouts like that. That's something that's entirely new to me.
Yeah. Now, what did you do to promote this magazine?
So, yeah, the kind of dirty secret about promotion, and like this actually kills me to like talk about social media and be like, it's actually great to have writers who have a following, right? So like, let me phrase it this way, right? So like, I hate that that part of my answer is get writers who have an audience to write for you. I hate that that's part of the equation. I hate that that's part of the equation.
But because that is the real world, you know?
Because I myself am a writer, and I fucking hate that I have to like sing and dance like a fucking clown on social media. Like if social media were a building, I'd fly a plane into it. You know what I mean? Like I hate social media, and not just because I've worked in it for like a million goddamn years. It kind of preys on the worst parts of a human being, and it's really,
I get it.
Yeah.
It sucks, and it just feels worse and worse. Like every platform just feels shittier. It like occasionally I'll peek in on Twitter and it just feels bad. It doesn't feel good to be there. I mean, it's always been bad, but there was also like sometimes it'd be really fun.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't fucking feel fun anymore.
And it's just like having to debase yourself and even just do things that are so like what I would call, I suppose, like mundane cringe of being like, that's it. That's the tweet, you know, like that kind of shit. And it's just like, God damn it. However, you know, writers who have an audience, you know, I'm not trying to sound like I'm exploiting these people when I'm like, okay, if you hire a writer who has an audience, they're actually promoting the magazine, not you. Because like, okay, when I started Typebar magazine, on Blue Sky, when I started the Blue Sky account, we had 0 followers, obviously, because we're a brand new magazine, right? And so Gwen Katz, who wrote the amazing essay on the death of the sun, she has over 12,000 Twitter followers and over 1,000 followers on Blue Sky, which, in my opinion, at this point is actually worth more than 12,000 Twitter followers.
Especially since at least 6,000 of your Twitter followers are going to be porn bots who respond to everything with pussy in bio.
And so before we got linked on Hacker News, Blue Sky was our #1 referral source from our writers sharing their articles on Blue Sky, right? So we had
from Blue Sky, not from Twitter?
Yeah, in the first few days it was Blue Sky, and then it ended up then it was Twitter, and then it was Reddit, and then it was Hacker News. And right now it's still Hacker News.
I wonder why not Twitter. Is Twitter... I've heard that Twitter kind of like doesn't really show links very well or something.
Yeah,
that it kind of hides
like
them from the timeline.
It has like they used to have no text on them at all, and now it has like a weird little tiny headline on the bottom.
Yeah.
Twitter did eventually supplant Blue Sky, but it took some guy I hadn't... He had a lot of followers. I hadn't heard of him, but he linked Simon's post, and it got a lot of traffic.
That's cool.
But that's like kind of an important thing. Like J.R. Bolt is another person who has a lot of followers on Blue Sky and gets a lot of engagement.
He posts really good.
Yeah.
He's very good at it.
So you have to have writers who have a following and are maybe a little more established. Because I kind of liken it to almost pro wrestling. And so I think building a roster of writers for an issue of the magazine is like building out a professional wrestling card. You need writers who have their own audiences, who can like attract people to the magazine, to the brand, to the product. But then it's also helpful to have writers who maybe don't have a huge audience online yet, but are still writing really, really interesting stuff, right? So you have the people who are like drawing the crowd, so to speak, and the crowd while they're there, you know, you as a publisher and as an editor, you're trying to showcase these other voices too, you know, so that people can become familiar with them and their work. And I know that's a little idealistic, But that's how it would work in an ideal issue of the magazine, right? Because truth is, I, as much as I hate to say this, we are in an era of individuals and not institutions, right?
Yeah.
And having writers able to promote the site via promoting their own work is very helpful. I am a writer. I understand how much that sucks. So I try to like promote other people's work from the Typebar account as much as possible, because I hate that like publishers, if you're a novelist, don't really do any promotion for you anymore. You gotta do it yourself. And so
It's fucked up.
okay, right now Typebar magazine, we've got like 200 followers on Blue Sky, and I think like 270 or whatever on Instagram, and I try to promote the work of all of our writers there as much as I can. But until the magazine develops a very large following, in the early days, it is kind of dependent on, as they say in wrestling, being put over by writers with an audience.
All right. Now, how involved are you as an editor? Like, do you take a really light hand? Are you really, really involved in suggesting how the writers shape their pieces? Like,
Right.
what does the process look like?
So I try to fill in the cracks of a piece kind of as needed. So this could mean I'm doing like tons and tons of line edits and leaving the structure alone. Or it could mean I'm moving all the paragraphs around but leaving the sentences alone, and it all depends kind of on what the writer brings to me. And as someone who is a writer himself, I think the most fun thing about editing is actually working on a piece while trying to make sure the voice of the original author is still coming through, because it's not a matter of just saying, okay, here's how I would write it. It's helping the author's voice be as clear as possible and the argument kind of be as clear as possible. You know, I hate to go back to, because I've mentioned being in an MFA program several times, and I swear to God, I'm not a guy in your MFA. But I really liked being in an MFA program, and I learned so much about writing, and I thought it was really awesome. And one of the kind of drills that we would have, they called it an imitative annotation, which is where you took a piece from a writer and then you wrote a piece of your own, but you tried to imitate that writer's voice. And
Oh, that's fun.
yes, it was some of the most fun I've had and some of the most interesting pieces I've written, because I'm like, okay, let's try to write something that completely doesn't sound like me, that sounds like someone else, but is an idea that I have, and that was super fun. And that actually, believe it or not, taught me more about editing than like editing exercises, you know what I mean? Because you're almost kind of doing the same thing as an editor, where you're like, okay, this paragraph needs to be kind of sculpted, massaged, or whatever, or this thing needs to be rephrased. How can I kind of do this if I was trying to help them, illustrate this point better? How would I say it as them, right? And then seeing if they agree or whatever, right? And so editing is actually a ton of fun. I really like it. I was tempted, as many are tempted to think, and this is wrong, that like, oh, if you're an editor, you're just like a failed writer. But it's so not the case, because it truly is a different skill set. There's like similarities that overlap, but it's just...
It is. And it's probably a skill set I could not do personally. I don't think I could do it. It looks really hard.
Because it's like... I almost liken it to Tetris. So like my fiance is really good at puzzles, and like whenever I try to organize like a shelf or anything, it always looks like shit. And like I'll see her eyes scan it immediately and be like, okay, you should put this here, this here, this here, this here, and suddenly everything is like neatly organized. And so like for me, I kind of get the same thing when I'm looking at a nonfiction piece, and I'll like do a scan of it, be like, okay, this paragraph needs to go here, this paragraph needs to go there, this sentence should be 2 sentences ago, and it just kind of starts falling into place. And so like people talk about enjoying writing, and to an extent I do enjoy writing, but I enjoy editing more. And so like when I'm editing, I'm like, is this what people who say they like writing, is this what they feel? Like, is this what I'm supposed to feel like when I'm writing? I don't know. But it's been a labor of love, for sure. Like I've really enjoyed it, and some pieces need more work than others, of course, but I'm always happy to help people shape things into a piece that's really good, so long as they come to me with a concrete pitch already. Like if you have something vague, like I'm not going to help you bring it into something that's, I'm not going to like come up with the idea for you, but if you've got a really great pitch and you, write a first draft and it's still a bit kind of amorphous, I'm happy to help you shape it into something. But do come to me with a very laser focused, concrete pitch first.
The first issue
Sure.
made a surprisingly big splash when it debuted. Like, you can put brilliant content out there. There's absolutely no guarantee that anyone's going to look at it. You can promote things really well. That still isn't a guarantee. It's really fucking hard to find an audience for something new, especially when it's not SEO-ish, you know?
Right.
And you somehow managed to make that happen, so how the fuck did you do that? How did that happen?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the praise. Second of all, pessimistically, I don't think it's ever going to happen again. So issue 1 was unique in that it was released all at once for free as part of the like promotion for the first issue, right? So like it didn't make sense to put issue 1 behind a Times paywall because nobody had read any of it yet, right? So like who could possibly know if it was worth paying for? So future issues are going to be behind the Times paywall. That's for patrons only, and so we'll be releasing kind of one at a time. So the next issue launches in late June, and then as the weeks go by, we'll release one article at a time. So like having a ton of attention immediately right away on 2 essays that are being linked in various places and blowing up, that's probably unlikely to happen again. But I think the answer kind of goes back to building a good stable of writers for an issue. You want people who have a following of their own, and then you also want a kind of myriad of essays that are covering like different topics that are going to draw people in. It just so happened that the 2 that went viral were both about science fiction, but we were running the gamut from like Barbie typewriters all the way to the fucking nostalgia critic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That helped a lot, I think. But it does go back to what I was saying earlier, unfortunately, that like, yes, we had people who had established followings online. And, when I was going into Discover on Blue Sky, I was seeing people sharing Typebar magazine articles, right? And so I think that was something that was very helpful is having people who are kind of known quantities in the issue, especially if you're new, because you don't have any institutional clout or prestige or whatever you want to call it of your own.
Yeah, they were known, and they're also really fucking good writers.
Yeah, I mean, that helps, that they were writing stuff that was really well researched. And in the case of Simon's article, for some reason controversial. That always mystifies me.
Oh, let's talk about that, actually.
Sure.
Let's jump ahead to talk about... Yeah. Simon McNeill wrote a piece for the first issue called Nobody Wants to Buy the Future. Why Science Fiction Literature is Vanishing. And it ended up making a whole lot of people in sci-fi publishing really fucking mad. Really, there was a lot of arguing with it, a lot of floundering, trying to debate it. I remember a lot of people insisting, science fiction literature is doing fine. Look, there's a bunch of popular sci-fi movies. And he's like, well, I wasn't talking about movies. I was talking about books and magazines, which aren't doing so good. But no. And I've heard that in like private forums and private publication discords, I'm not going to name names, there was some real wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Yes.
Did that response surprise you?
Yeah, it did. So I had no idea that people would be apoplectic over Simon's essay. And this, as you note, this paroxysm of rage seized an entire section of the online writing community. Like, it was in the capital D discourse for like 2 days. I did receive several messages from writing friends about a Discord that shall not be named, being like, bro, your magazine's being put on blast in this one Discord. But, is
this the same Discord we're talking about? That is the Discord of a rather prominent sci-fi publication?
Yes, which is a publication I'm a fan of. You know what I mean? Make no mistake. If they want to drag Typebar, that's fine. I'm not mad. The more magazines there are, the better, right? So like, okay, if people got upset, I don't care. I was shocked because to me the article contained nothing explicitly kind of provocative. It didn't resort to make another professional wrestling comparison. In wrestling, there's something called cheap heat, and that's like if you go and if you're a wrestler and you're a heel, right, a bad guy who wants to be booed, and you're going at a show in Madison Square Garden, you wear like a Red Sox jersey or something like that, right?
Right.
Something that's a cheap way to piss off the audience, right? And so
Right.
Simon's essay, there was no cheap heat in it. It was all, for me, a very calm, relaxed discussion of the landscape and of the numbers. But Reddit was very upset. Certain rarefied Discord servers were very upset. And what's funny is I genuinely don't like upsetting people. But if a sound argument calmly stated gets you fuming, maybe that's a you problem.
Yeah, like I would note, I don't think there was anything in that article that was gloating. So,
Yeah.
Simon is a sci-fi writer. Yeah. I'm sure he wants sci-fi publishing to be very good. I'm sure he wants sci-fi to be selling a lot of books because that would be good for him personally, financially. So when he's saying yeah, our industry's not doing so good, let's maybe talk about why, it just strikes me as someone who's very trying to rationally look at the situation and create his analysis. And I can understand maybe you disagree with his conclusions. That's fine. That makes sense. But the idea that actually American sci-fi publishing is in a really good place right now, no, it isn't. It's not. No, it isn't.
Yeah, because I'm not gonna claim I know everything. I'm not in a position where I see all of the sales data. I'm not head of a publishing house or a bookseller or whatever.
Yeah.
But what I ask myself when this discussion happened was okay, what was the last time I heard anyone outside of the science fiction fantasy space, the online bubble, mention a science fiction book published recently? In other words, when was the last time I can recall a recently published sci-fi book kind of breaking containment to a degree that normal people were talking about it?
Yeah, it's been ages. I guess it's just Jeff Vandermeer who doesn't really publish within the sci-fi sphere. He's despite being a sci-fi writer, he's kind of separate from that whole scene for various reasons, and actually very critical of the scene.
Yeah, and so so many people who I know who don't even read, they know Colleen Hoover, I hate to say, but science fiction has not broken containment since I can remember. And I'm sure people are going to come in and they're going to say, oh, well, actually, there's the Three Body Problem because it got a Netflix show. And it's okay, that book is from 2008. That's almost 20 years ago. And then, of course...
Oh, God, damn
right?
it. Why did you have to remind me that?
Yeah.
Oh,
and then
fuck, I'm old. God,
there's Dune, but that book was from 1965.
Right.
And so in my own reading, I find less and less science fiction ends up appealing to me. The last science fiction book I got jazzed about was A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, right? I didn't get to finish it because I was reading it kind of recreationally in the middle of my MFA reading list, and I had to focus on my required readings. But the book was very thorough, very richly written, and contained this passion for kind of poetry and lyricism, as opposed to passion for absolutely nothing other than exhausted cultural references, whether it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer or fucking Marvel or whatever.
Yeah.
And before that, the last science fiction book that really got to me was way back in 2014. It was this wonderful little book called Elysium by Jennifer Marie Brissett. It was a really unique exploration of form that I don't often see in science fiction. It's the story of the eradication of all humans on Earth by an alien species that terraforms Earth into a desert, which itself isn't terribly, out of the ordinary for science fiction, but it's told from the perspective of a malfunctioning computer program that humans embedded into the atmosphere. So the story, the story is basically the same story told over and over again as the computer attempts to repair itself and reboot, and you get more and more of the cycle each time, and the cycle kind of changes, but some things are similar, and it was just really weird and interesting and kind of sad.
Wow.
And I would recommend anybody read it. It's a short book. You can read it in a day if you really want, and that's actually particularly why I love it, because as cool as I thought A Memory Called Empire was, it's a fucking doorstopper, and it's I ain't got time for that. Sorry, and it's a part of a whole big series. I really wish science fiction could kind of be svelte and interesting. It's I personally, when I was younger, I liked doorstoppers because I had a shitty job where I had to work till 2 a.m, and so it's okay, absolutely nothing is happening between midnight and 2 a.m. I can just read. But as I have more responsibilities, it's harder for me to commit to like a 600-page novel or whatever.
Yeah, I don't have time for that unless it's like a really thoughtful, important book. If it's just like supposed to be adventure, like just get to the adventure. Just show me some aliens and get the fuck out.
Exactly.
Like I don't want genre movies to be 3.5 hours. I want them to be a tight 90 minutes.
Right.
A good tight 90 minutes of a zombie movie or whatever the fuck.
Right.
That's what I want. I'm sorry. I got shit to do. Yeah.
Yes. You have cats to play fetch with, and then the cats don't get the
I got a job. I got to record another episode that makes people mad for reasons I didn't predict. I gotta work on the novel that I've been working on for like 5 fucking years now.
Is it The Lost Reel? Because I remember you posted a sample of it, and it was really, really good. Where it was the woman going to the party where there was like the rich girl. Everybody knew she was a rich girl, and everybody was like a fucking sociopath.
Thank you.
It was, having been surrounded by people like that in the media industry, it was a very realistic depiction of that kind of scene.
Oh, well, thank you. Someday I'll finish that book. Someday. I hope I got just... But anyway. So yeah, that got a ton of traffic, and a lot of people accused Simon McNeill of being a contrarian or writing like rage clickbait or something, which is so strange because he's never done that in his life, and that was really frustrating to see.
And I wouldn't publish rage bait because like I've been like, I hate to be like, oh, the media industry makes me fucking sick, but like I've been surrounded by this shit for a really long time. Like I remember peak like thought catalog like outrage bait articles from like 2014. They had one that was like, I'm tired of it was like, I'm a rich girl who's tired of being poor to be liked by you, and it made the front page of the New York Post.
Oh god.
Yeah, like I remember being mired in that shit for a really long time, so I would not publish rage bait. And so the fact that people were saying I was like, you haven't seen rage bait if you think that's what this is.
No. Rage bait might have been that recent piece about like that girl talking about how she loves older men and is defying convention with her May December romances, and then you find out that she's dating a man who's 3 years older than her. Yeah. Like, my god.
Or like the Atlantic article that was like, I bet you all feel fucking stupid for shaming Kate Middleton now. And it's like, well, they were deliberately misleading people and lying, so no.
No, I don't. Just no. All right, so away from Simon McNeill, let's talk about another one of your really big articles. Yeah. You ran a really good piece by Gwen C. Katz that examined science fiction literature about the death of the sun.
Right.
What interested you in running this one?
So I wish I could say there was some cleverness on my part, like, I've spotted a gap in the market in the form of a lengthy essay on the interplay between science and fiction. But really, Gwen, she emailed me and pitched me this article, and it sounded exactly like what ended up being published because it's just, I hadn't read anything like it before, right? And what kind of can be frustrating about novel writing is you're looking for similarities, you're not looking for differences, right? What I mean is agents want you to pitch things that are kind of like other things because they know there's an established track record for that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Totally my book, it's like Hunger Games meets fucking Twilight. I don't know.
And even like when I worked in media, sometimes I'd have editors be like, oh, we want our version of this other essay that's going viral. We need some kind of like offshoot.
Oh, yeah. There were a lot of those. I'm sure Torblog did its own fucking multiple versions of Everyone is Beautiful, No One is Horny.
Yeah. And
shout out to you fuckers. I see what you're doing.
And so this is something I had never seen an essay like this. And Gwen did such a great job of pitching it to me. And I was like, oh, wow, this sounds really, really interesting. And then the first draft kind of blew me away and just how well researched it was and well argued it was.
Yeah, she fucking dug deep.
Yeah.
There were so many books and writers I'd never heard of. And like, oh, yeah, and here's this novel from like 1871. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and so there was this like London Review of Books caliber essay suddenly in my inbox. And I was like, holy shit. And so it was, I wish there was more to say other than it was a really brilliant, well-researched, well-written essay that gets into the weeds to a degree that a few other places do and analyzes a fascinating topic that is the relationship of fiction, particularly science fiction, to scientific breakthroughs of various era and how those breakthroughs influence what happens on the page, right? With the focus on the science around the sun. Gwen would obviously have a lot more to say around the process, and maybe you should interview her for an episode, because that could be something that's very interesting.
Yeah, that was a really interesting piece, and really like melancholic, and just took some really deep dives into a lot of stuff I haven't seen before.
For all the people who want to say we're trying to do outrage bait, like Gwen's essay, which is as far from outrage bait as you could possibly get, that is the #1 essay on Typebar magazine by a wide margin. So if you're gonna say we're like an outrage bait, like quote unquote clickbait website, like, first of all, we don't run ads, so there's absolutely zero incentive to run clickbait, because we have nothing to, we don't monetize the traffic, first of all. Second of all, that is the least rage bait thing ever. Like, we want people to come to Typebar and either feel good or feel informed. And that was, an essay, maybe it's about the death of the sun, so maybe you might not feel good. But,
I guess timely with the eclipse and everything.
Yes,
maybe
you'll definitely feel like really informed, right? Like, and so this was kind of everything I wanted Typebar to be, that essay, and people responded to it. So I'm really glad.
It struck me reading it. It was like actually feeling like I'm being informed and not necessarily being sold to.
Yeah.
Because it's very typical in a lot of other literature blogs or magazines today. It's more of the, like, 10 new novels about queer women turning into dogs or something. And it's like, okay, half of these... Oh, Tor, you ran a BuzzFeed-style listicle that lists 10 essential books that your publisher is putting out right now. This is an advertisement. This is just, or if this doesn't belong to you, it's full of Amazon affiliate links where you get a little bit of the kickback if people buy it from the, okay. It didn't feel like you were trying to sell me on shit. It was like one of the books was like, yeah, this really deep book is fucking terrible to read. It is horrible to read, but it's about the death of the sun, so I'm going to examine it. Yeah,
that was like kind of one of my mission statements for Typebar. Was I was kind of sick how so much of fiction writing today, when I say fiction writing, I mean like writing around fiction.
Yeah.
Writing about fiction, I suppose, like, is essentially just part of a PR campaign. Like, it's either thinly veiled or not veiled, really. And so I wanted writing about fiction that existed independently of publisher marketing campaigns, right? And PR. And this is something like, okay, we're writing about, or Gwen is writing about, or was writing about, did write about works that in some cases were literally hundreds of years old that like nobody is going to be profiting from, right? And so we're writing essays just to like inform people, and because art and writing are really kind of one of the only things that make, or maybe the only thing that makes being born tolerable, right? And that's why I like J.R. Bolt's essay about the Etched City. That's why I like Eric de Roulette's essay about A Woman of the Sword, right? We're just talking about literature and books for the sake of it. We're not fucking trying to sell anything. We're like, okay, either this book was really cool and here's why, or this book was bad and here's why, or, this body of work was really interesting and here's why, or here's the history of these kind of societal forces and how they shaped the fiction of its time, right? And all that stuff is really kind of fascinating, and it kind of, I don't want to say it doesn't exist anywhere, because that's not true. It's just, it's been occupying a shrinking and smaller and smaller and smaller percentage of online writing. And I had to try to fix it. Being a man of modest means, I had to put what I could to try to fix it before I died. Not that I plan on dying anytime soon, but you never know. So I had to tell myself I at least gave it a shot.
Yeah. So now, what article did you expect to blow up the biggest but didn't?
So it's funny. The Barbie typewriter essay was wonderful. The author, Sarah
it's
Everett.
Great.
Yeah. Sarah Everett, the author of the article, she is the world's foremost expert in Barbie typewriters. And she operates a great typewriter-focused YouTube channel called Just My Typewriter. It's a great name. She's also on Instagram under the same name. And I think if an article about the Barbie typewriter was posted somewhere with like a wider, more general audience, it would have blown up, like an NPR or something, or like HuffPost, BuzzFeed, whatever. I think it would have blown up there because it's such a strange and funny thing. You have this like hot pink Barbie typewriter that could secretly write hidden codes and even got used by a gang in Ireland to write hidden messages to each other. But I guess the readership the first issue attracted was more interested in the science fiction stuff versus a weird kind of little typewriter toy.
Yeah, I just kind of would have thought because of Barbie, you know, Barbie's and feminism and stuff is like kind of big right now. That I guess I would have predicted that one to blow up pretty big.
I feel like what'll happen is like a year from now, someone will post it on like the Today I Learned Reddit and be like, today I learned there was a Barbie typewriter that could do blah, 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 blah. And then it'll, you know, blow up a year after it's been published. It's like one of those types of articles.
Yeah, that's definitely a unique piece. That's not something... I don't know if people are doing a lot of Barbie typewriter SEO shit right now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Now, why did you run not one, but two articles about Doug the Nostalgia Critic Walker of Channel Awesome Entertainment in your first issue? And can we look forward to even more Doug Walker articles in the future?
So what's funny is I initially did not plan on having two. I just wanted one. But both pitches came within literal seconds of one another. And they were both so good that I just accepted both of them because I didn't want to have to tell somebody no because they were both really good. And I hope this isn't a cop-out, but the answer to the question is kind of in the essays, right? So the Doug Walker movies, and if you're not familiar with Doug Walker, he's a guy who is the Nostalgia Critic. The Nostalgia Critic was like this kind of offshoot of the Angry Video Game Nerd, but instead of looking at old video games, he looked at old movies. And eventually he started a website called Channel Awesome that was almost kind of like a YouTube multi-channel network in a way, right? Where he had this website called Channel Awesome that was a video website. And this was when like online video was still kind of in its infancy.
It was before YouTube kind of was everything.
Yeah. And he had all these other reviewers on Channel Awesome, and they would host these anniversary films where he would like browbeat all the other reviewers to like go somewhere or travel somewhere and do like a movie. And it eventually, years later, this document came out where there were all these alleged abuses, and one podcast called it the most illegal movie set since The Twilight Zone.
God damn it. Fuck.
Yeah. So if you don't know, The Twilight Zone, people were decapitated by a helicopter.
Decapitated several actors with a helicopter on set.
Children, yes.
Yeah, two of them were children.
So, So the Channel Awesome movies have this place of infamy in, like, internet history, right? But those movies, they encapsulate a very specific and transitory time on the internet. This is like late aughts, early 2010s, better than any other cultural artifacts, you know, and it's so clear to me that these movies, above all else, are kind of a Rosetta Stone for a certain time period. So you have this early aughts internet that, despite its flaws, is more open and more interesting and weirder, right? And then you have the internet of the 2010s that starts rapidly corporatizing and consolidating until you have the internet of today, where there's 5 websites. And to paraphrase Max Reed's newsletter, everybody acts like there's a gas leak nearby, you know? And so the channel movies kind of hint at that arc, right? So you have the first one that's almost kind of like, you know, a celebration of what's possible. You have, Doug creates this website of media reviewers, and they do this big anniversary celebration in the form of a movie called Kickassia. But by the third one, the most infamous of the 3, called To Boldly Flee, the dream of Channel Awesome is over. Everyone is fucking miserable, and you can even tell on camera that no one wants to fucking be there. And even in the content of the movie, even in the narrative itself, Doug has this base awareness that, as the movie says, the age of the reviewer is coming to an end, right? Even Doug can see the changes in the internet on the horizon, that it's going to the way of corporations and consolidation, right? The essays put it more eloquently than I do, but I hate to compare To Boldly Flee to fucking Blood Meridian, but
God damn.
The end of Blood Meridian, right? That's something I've read about where, so you have the judge who either kills or does God knows what to the kid, and then it has this sort of almost non sequitur ending where it's a guy putting poles in the ground, in the dirt, right? And people have endlessly speculated as to what that means. And the interpretation that, from what I have read, seems to have the most acceptance is that it's a guy putting in fence posts and is fencing off the prairie. And that is kind of the symbolism of the end of the prairie and of the end of the open frontier, right? And so in a way, to boldly flee is kind of like the end of Blood Meridian in that this is a symbol of the end of a certain era of the internet, of the open frontier of the internet, right? And as Christopher Sloche noted, if I'm saying his last name right, apologies if I'm not, you can yell at me in the Discord. Doug Walker, he used to be able to find his content on Channel Awesome, which he owned. Now the channelawesome.com website redirects to his YouTube channel. His YouTube channel is owned by Google, right? And so it very much is this closing of the frontier moment, kind of like the end of Blood Meridian. I know that's going to be like, if anyone is ever dragging me online, like if I piss off people, they're going to look for this soundbite and they're going to be like, this fucking jerk off compared Blood Meridian to the fucking Nostalgia Critic. Shows what he knows.
Yeah. So I do think that's very interesting that most people would probably not say, yeah, Doug Walker definitely deserves not one but two deep dives. But I felt like both of them did feel like they were justified to exist. Yeah. I do think it is worthwhile, like it or not, internet personalities, as ridiculous and cringe as they are the culture. At least they're a huge part of the culture now. Shit like Mr. Beast is like, whatever the fuck that is huge. Shitloads of people are watching that. So I think it is worth examining them in a thoughtful way as opposed to the usual either, stan accounts versus reaction or drama channels.
Yeah, I was going to say, because if you look at something like, to some degree, I don't want to say film criticism doesn't exist anymore because that's not true, but a lot of criticism has kind of just been iced out because there's no real financial incentive anymore for it to exist because you're just going to piss off. If the media industry is predicated on access, which to some degree it is, you don't want to be criticizing people. You don't want to be criticizing anything because it's going to jeopardize your access. And so that's bad for film criticism. It's bad for book criticism. It's bad for all kinds of, while film criticism exists, you have TV criticism too. There's never really been kind of YouTube criticism in the same way, in an intellectual way, at least that I've seen. It's just, as you note, it's fucking drama channels, it's reactions, it's all this weird kind of stuff that is part of the ecosystem. And it would be so curious to imagine okay, what does internet criticism or YouTube criticism, whatever you want to call it, if you adapt film criticism to YouTube, right? What does that look like? And I feel like those essays actually did a really kind of great job, but they're also, it's worth mentioning, kind of historical and cultural analysis as well, because those movies are a decade old.
Yeah, because it is very easy to point at someone like Doug Walker and say look at this asshole.
Yeah.
But you got to say something a little more thoughtful than that. Okay, what does this asshole say about us? What is
Exactly.
Yeah. So, what lessons, if any, are there to learn from the surprising success of the first issue of Typebar magazine?
So I think to some degree, and we kind of mentioned this, there is pent-up demand. I don't know how much, but there's clearly some level of pent-up demand for interesting essays, right? To another degree, more broadly, we're kind of seeing this reformation of media on the margins right now, right? So you have the core of the industry that was essentially shattered over the last few years, right? Look at what happened to all the Gawker media properties. Look at what happened.
R.I.P.
Yeah. Look at what happened to Vice. Look at what happened to BuzzFeed. And you have slowly coming together writers starting places like Aftermath, right? So Aftermath, if you're not familiar listening to this, I don't know if it's all of them, but a bunch of the ex-Kotaku people who left Kotaku, the gaming website, they started their own gaming website co-op called Aftermath. They already have over 3,000 paid subscribers, and I don't even think it's been a year. I'm not even sure if it's been 6 months. So there's demand to some degree for interesting essays and coverage of topics that people like. That's not just a bunch of shitty press releases or spam or whatever, right? And so you also have things like Defector. They're very open. I don't remember their subscriber numbers off the top of my head, but they openly kind of talk about how many subscribers they have, and it's a pretty impressive number. You've got Flaming Hydra. There's others I'm probably forgetting to mention, but you're seeing this reformation of online writing and what it means to run a website in this new age of the internet, where the kind of, I don't want to say means of production, but where the means of production have kind of just been destroyed, right? Where these kind of like vultures came in, chopped everything up, sold it for parts, and then there's just kind of nothing. It's like shitty Facebook memes and the New York Times, basically, and some contrarians on Substack. And so we're seeing kind of things start to like reform on the edges, and we'll see how it ends up playing out. I think Typebar is one very, very, very small part of what's going on, but hopefully we're one drop in a monsoon that'll inevitably change the way writing happens on the internet. Either that, or we're going to flame out and be completely forgotten in short order. Who knows?
All right. Now, we've been talking for a little bit over an hour, actually, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, one more question before we go. If one of our listeners wants to send a pitch to Typebar, what's a good way to do it?
So yeah, you can pitch me. It's Matt, M-A-T-T, at typebarmagazine.com. If you go on the website to the submissions section, it really should say pitches instead of submissions. I should probably fix that. There's like a guide on how to do it. So like, I like very specific pitches. Vague stuff I'm less likely, because like I'm less likely to respond positively to it. Not that I'm gonna like yell at you, but like, this needs a bit of refinement, So don't just pitch me like, hey, the Etch City was like a cool book and people should remember the Etch City because it was really cool. Pitch me like, okay, why it was cool, what's unique about it, right? Make your case for it and make sure there's kind of like a so what, and like, okay, well, why is this important? Like we have I don't want to give out spoilers for the next issue, but we have some really cool essays. We have like a really good one about Neopets and promise of the early internet and sociology and lived spaces, and as it pertains to Neopets, we've got a great one on Sherlock Holmes. We do accept pitches on like game design. I would love some stuff on tabletop game design. Simon McNeil wrote a really brilliant essay on his blog about the game Wingspan. It's this like game where you have to build a bird habitat, and he talked about how that the design of the game was actually about post-capitalist futures, and it was one of the most fascinating pieces of game design criticism I've ever read. And you don't see a lot of tabletop game design criticism. I would love some really interesting critiques of criticism. And when I say criticism, I don't mean like bad things. I mean analysis, right? I think to some degree, criticism has become a dirty word and it shouldn't be. But really good and interesting pieces of game design criticism. Right now I have enough video game stuff. There's going to be 3 video game pieces in issue 2. So I don't need any more video game stuff. I would like some book stuff right now, particularly because like, for as much as like I don't want us to get a reputation of like a bad a place that like writes about how books are bad, because I know we're gonna have at least one critical review of a book in issue 2. I would love an essay kind of like J.R. Bolt's The Etched City essay, or Eric de Roulette's essay on A Woman of the Sword, which are looking at a book and explaining why it's either an old work that deserves to be remembered or a new one that kind of defied expectations and was better for it, right? So things like that. And you can pitch me, Matt, at typebarmagazine.com. We pay right now $50 per essay. Hopefully when we get more Patreon subscribers, I'll be able to afford to pay more. But yeah, that's how you can pitch me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Raquel.
And before we go, what would you like to plug aside from, of course, Typebar Magazine?
Oh, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm at Wolfbridge .bluesky.social, I think, whatever the default Blue Sky thing is. And then I also have a newsletter, abridgedthoughts.com. That since Typebar has launched, I haven't been able to update quite as frequently, but I like to post about what I'm reading and that kind of thing. So if you're curious about my non-Typebar thoughts, you can follow me in those places.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Raquel.
And thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, please head to patreon.com/writegood and subscribe. Subscribers get access to our Discord, where we have a little writing group going on, and we also like to trade gossip because we're messy bitches who love drama. Sometimes we'll stream movies, sometimes we'll stream video games and goof on each other. It's generally a pretty good place, although we do argue sometimes. But, that's also fun
Only
too.
on Christmas Eve.
Only on Christmas Eve. Then it becomes Thunderdome. All fucking bets are off. But that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep writing good.
This has been Rite Gud with R.S. Benedict. It was hosted by R.S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Theme song by OK Glass. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegud@kittysneezes.com. That's RITEGUD@kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegud. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production.
kittysneezes.com in color.